I'm Chris Agget, and you're watching The Shadow Project.
In this episode of The Shadows Project, I chat with C.J Agget about his series of novels Deep the Climb of Truth and Deep the Embers of Life. We also discuss the writing community chat show, which he co-hosts with his friend Chris Hooley.
You've got two books, yeah, but I've read the first one, Deep.
The Climb of Truth.
Really intriguing book at the start. You're reading it and you're sort of like gripped. It's like, it's familiar themes about like a cabin in the woods and all this type of thing. And there's something a bit dodgy going on with a other figure. So if you could just explain that and then we'll work around that.
Definitely, I know exactly what you're saying. The familiar themes there. There's been stories upon stories, and if you look into maybe even the zombie genre in itself, there's similar stories. But then the young lady in the cabin in the woods with her father is similar stories there as well. Mm-hmm. So I think it was really an influence of a lot of things I kind of watched as a young person. Really, sort of film influence more than books, to be honest with you. And when I wrote this book, it was after sort of a bit of a family event in my past where my grandfather passed. And it was kind of the incentive I needed to do more in my life, if that makes sense. So I was never someone who really wanted to write fully. Growing up, it wasn't something I always had a passion for. I just had this story or a creativity within me. And this was kind of what I wanted to get out. And even though it does kind of, like you said, in different ways, kind of link up with other stories, it was kind of my interpretation of that story. And as soon as I started putting, the words on the page, it just started spewing out and just became what it is now. Yeah.
I mean, like familiar themes is a good thing with them, them books anyway. But like, is it hard to write in those perimeters where you think, because it's still got its own, it's still unique, yeah, but also to write where you think, okay, this is similar to that, or is it? Did you just not think about it too much and just write?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think the way I write is very much, pantster, very much unplotted, unplanned almost. So I literally sat there and started writing as this character, Daisy, who's in obviously the main character throughout the two books. And I just kind of
starts off as D, if anyone reads the book.
It does, yes, starts off as D, a bit confusing. So I started off this character in my head and literally just followed her on the page, and her journey was just being played out in front of me. So it was almost like I was reading the story, but just projecting it onto the page. So it's a really strange one for me as a first book to write. So, but I'm really glad it went that way.
Yeah, it's mad. You speak to different writers. They all got their own sort of way of doing things and that. But you use lots of like sensory imagery in your books, and there's lots of like, even when you can feel her hunger when she's eating some noodles.
Certainly. I don't know. I don't know why that is. And again, as a debut book, it was kind of finding my own feet as a writer, and it just felt right. And a lot of people reference how it feels like a series or a film, like you're almost having a visual effect, whereas that's how I felt when I was writing it. So it was kind of the way I projected that and the way I felt it as it was coming out, onto the text.
I thought you might be on like a diet or something when you were writing.
I'm constantly on a diet. I mean,
me too. It never really works. I just kind of, I'm always on this diet, this borderline to keep this like bang average body. I have to be on diet all the time. Yeah. I
think that's just adulthood, really. I don't know. Yeah, I'm constantly. I don't know. I think I'm. If I was in the military in the past, and that kind of reflects in the book as well. And there's definitely been times when I'm cold and hungry, and because the way it developed in its own right, almost, I knew that I had a general sense of the story and it was going in a direction, but there's so many things that I kind of jumped into the story without even knowing I wanted to put it in there, if that made sense. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the characters kind of developed in their own right, and some of the story just kind of felt natural to go in that direction. So when we get from Daisy's story, obviously starts in the cabin, but an event happens that forces her into the city, at which point she's lost her father and she has to go and try and find him, but then ends up in the epicenter of this, kind of crazy sort of meltdown with this private military and their sort of human experiments that go wrong, I guess super soldiers or whatever they are. So those characters developed in that sense. And then obviously with my sort of, like you said, experience, I was in the British Army for 6 years. I was able just to put a bit of strangely though, it's all kind of American. I kind of put like, just a bit of.
That's because of the films we watch. They're always American,
Yeah, definitely.
And they're normally the ones who mess everything up. The American soldiers.
But it's kind of strange. I think for me, a massive influence for any of my writing, I look back at Max Brooks's World War Z. That book for me was just so in depth, and so the world building was incredible. So when one of my favorite scenes in that is there's a massive battle in the desert, and the American forces using all these like chemical or advanced weaponry that just doesn't work. Yeah. And I really like that, and I think it's a very similar story in that part there.
It ends on a cliffhanger, doesn't it? You've got to read the next part, really.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes the end, but then it kind of evolves in the next part. But this literally ends like Lord of the Rings. It's like the end of part one.
I think in that book, I really did well to end each chapter on where it leaves you wanting to find out what goes into the next one.
Yeah.
And I think looking back, because the two books are quite small, they're novellas, but I think just about breaking into the novel genre or realm of a novel. I'm not sure entirely, but they're more like novellas, so they're quite short. So in theory, I could have probably merged the two stories. And it's weird. It's just experience and developing yourself as an author. On my website, even put an additional ending that ties up a few of the characters from the first story. But looking back, I think someday I might go back and put them all into one book to make life a lot easier for the reader.
Yeah, I got cheated with this one. I got the audio book.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I just thought, you know what? I've never like listened to an audio book, and then I listened to the sample on yours, and the woman's voice didn't annoy me. And normally on the audio book, the person's voice annoys me. It's just got like, it's not how I feel the story, because it's a girl reading this, and I just imagined. I speeded it up to 1.25.
Okay.
She's a bit like slow the way she speaks, but it was really. But I also slowed it down in like some bits that are meant to be slow, so it was good. And I just cheated with it, so it was good, really good.
How did you find I mean, you hadn't read it, so then the character's voice obviously may not have meant as much to you. But for me, that process was a nightmare. We used something from one of the guests we had before, was acx.com is if you're an author, you can use this to sort of share royalties and things like this. And for me, who had written that character so intimately, to find someone's voice that matched that character, I really struggled with.
Yeah.
You can actually select, fine tune which kind of accent you're looking for. And it took me a long, long time to go through it. And in the end, what I had to do was go and search for these people, because you can actually go through people's auditions, whether they audition for you or not. So if you find a voice you like, this is what I did. I ended up approaching her, and then she was, okay to do the book. So I think if you're really struggling with auditions, which I was, then you have to go out and find something that kind of fits what you think it should sound like.
Yeah. And it's hard if you're going down the royalty share road. Yeah, it depends if you're paying people.
Yeah.
But that can be very, very expensive, can't it?
Well, do you know what? This is the one thing that I really sort of stand by, and it's been an up and down thing, because if you notice in this book, you may have seen some of the reviews recently. I say recently, I've had some fantastic reviews. I think I'm on 49 for this first book now. And it's still,
I'll do number 50.
Yeah, amazing. And it's still, I think, 4.6 out of 5 or 4.5 maybe. But the only criticisms I've ever had is because of certain grammar issues, perhaps. And this was down to, first of all, when I started writing, as I said, it kind of stumbled into my life, and I hadn't had a real vision of what I wanted to do with it. So I didn't really plan on much with this book. And when it developed into something, I thought, you know what, this is actually worth sharing with people. And the feedback kept coming. And I guess everyone knows what this is like when friends and family say, yeah, it's good. And you're thinking, well, is it? So I ended up getting this book out there. But everything I did, from the covers to the proofreading stuff, I did myself. So there were a few issues of grammar. I wasn't like an amazing person in my English literature or whatever like that. So there was a lot of software, but it wasn't up to the great standard or better standard of the second book, or even my third book that I'm writing now is way better. So when I look back on the first, I'm thinking, you know what, I could go back and change it. And I've even thought about doing this. But what I realize is people have said, no, it's great as it is. The story's great. Just leave it. And that's what I think you've got to stand by. If you're paying for something, you've got to realize how much it's going to cost and be very expensive, but you get that quality, hopefully, And if you don't, but I'm as a good example of, you don't have to have a super polished book to have a good story.
Yeah.
Although you should take more time, is because I clearly rushed that as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You'll see with the people, you've interviewed, I've interviewed, that there's some great stories there. Like Matt, I think Matt's recommended like 5 people or something. They've been great so far. I interviewed Anna Mossicat last week, and I saw it on your show and things like, people like this, and Mario Delolio. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's people who've got great stories. Some of them are just like, they self-published and they've promoted it well, and they've done everything right, like including the front cover and all these things. But it makes me, like I could see when you're writing this book, you've probably got these images in your head of like a movie. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like when I was reading Matt's book, of the same, like you have a movie idea in your head, and but then, so like when you're writing, you've got these movie ideas, but then they go and you watch the cinema. At the cinema, they're releasing like Top Gun 2 again, and like regurgitating all these old films, which are good in the day, you know what I mean? But it kind of frustrates me that they don't like use new people, because even just in a short space of time, I've seen there's many new writers who are really good. Or I don't know. What do you think?
Do you know what? I think you're right. And there's been a lot of regurgitation in the last few years, and from Ghostbusters to Top Gun, you mentioned there, and so many others. And I think the problem is that the film industry has gone from something that was very unique, and if a company was going to buy into a film, they really threw everything into it, and it was a risk for them. But now you've got so many indie, producing companies and things like this. They're snapping up stories kind of around more generally. So it's a safer bet for a big company that really wants to reel all the big numbers in, that they go with something that people will go to, whether it's actually good or not. Yeah. And I think when it comes to sort of the indie world in terms of writing, I think TV shows are almost more likely to be picking these up now instead of films. Yeah. And I think it's an easier thing to start to get going and to cut if it's not working.
That kind of got me excited. With my idea with doing this channel was getting writers who, and thinking of different ways to promote their work, because it's very difficult to say, like there's people who people don't really know, and they're coming on the show and people don't really know me. So it's a hard sell, and then you get some celebrity on, but like their audience doesn't really care because there's so many videos out there. But it's, hopefully it'll build and build, but as long as you create this kind of network of people. But is this what you're trying to do? You like the same sort of thing?
Well, to be honest with you, the podcast came out of the same sort of inspiration or lack of inspiration than the writing did. It was something that I kind of when I fell into the writing, it kind of felt natural, and it was something that probably should have been there before, but wasn't. And then when the podcast developed out of something that was very quick to happen, that then felt something supernatural, and it's been going for just over a year now. And we've been doing a couple of shows a week, recently 3-4 shows next week. So it's really ramped up, and it's just something that felt right. And it wasn't to build my network in terms of selling books, but it was as an understanding of the struggle it is to sell these books. Yeah. Twitter is where we do most of our business. And if you look at the community, is what helped me massively when I was writing, and to understand certain things and to meet people and them to give me advice. So when those tweets sort of get lost, it's really hard. And if you're publishing or trying to sell your books through social media, it's a bit of a nightmare. Yeah. So this was a platform for them to come and talk about their books, and similarly to yourself, that gives them the exposure that they might not have had. So I think, again, it comes down to money, and I don't think people realize before they write books that you don't make a hell of a lot back if you're going through something like Amazon. And even if you do get luckily published officially, then you still may not get, a big comeback for your finances.
Yeah. I know, like a friend of mine got like £10,000. His brother, not my friend, his brother wrote this book. He's a doctor, yeah, and he wrote this book, and he got £10,000 up front. And he was like, "It's rubbish. You only got £10,000 up front." And I was like, "That's more than like 99.999% of writers earn in their entire life." Yeah.
Oh, that's impressive.
I didn't understand, because people think if you've got a book that you're suddenly going to be like really rich, but
Yeah.
The case is it's very difficult.
It's one of the most common questions I think I've had is like, oh, how much money do you make? It's like, well, my books that tend to be set at rock bottom at times, and you realize you're making pennies.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole world then you've got to deal with, and people say, well, if your books are selling that cheap, people purposely won't buy them because they think the quality's poor. So you can't even set your prices right without having to really learn and look into things. So it's such a minefield out there that, I always think people with money make money. And that sounds stupid, but if you've got the money to throw into marketing to make your book look massive and put it in front of people's eyes, they're going to sell more.
Yeah, definitely.
So
you had a guy on one of the shows, the Writers Community Podcast, is it called? You've got
Writing Community Chat Show.
Chat show, yeah. So you had a guy on there who's like an expert on. He's got like a bald head. He's like an expert on doing these things. What's his name again? Sorry.
Dale, self-publishing with Dale Roberts.
An expert on YouTube, and he's an expert on writing because he's got like thousands of followers, and
he does.
He give you advice for the YouTube as well and the writing, or
he's got a few channels on YouTube, and he does a lot of connectivity there with bigger channels and writers, but he sells his books on how to publish on Amazon, which is really kind of unique to be doing videos on how to publish on Amazon and how to sell better books while selling his own book and, really promoting his YouTube channel. So he's got lots of ideas, but one thing, and this translates into the authors community as well, that one thing that you're doing, don't just try and bring in, income or, followers from your book, everything you do from your website, make sure everything counts. And every connection counts, and every follower on certain somethings counts to make that brand accessible everywhere.
Now you said your history is you were in the army for 6 years, and before this, what's your history with, like, were you academic in school, or did you what did you do?
I really wasn't, and you know what, people will probably be surprised. I moved around a lot when I was younger, just from sort of my father's kind of work, and so I never really settled in many places. And as a result, it was more than likely because I was playing rugby and the sun was outside. But in school, I wasn't massively academic. I did okay. I mean, I've got my grades and I went on to straight into work. So it's kind of surprising when people find out I've written books. And in fact, now I'm on my third book. So it's quite funny that they think that way. And I remember in school, we had to do this short story in class, and I actually got laughed at about my story because it was that bad. And then to think back on that now, when I've actually written stories that people really respond to, it's kind of interesting. So it's one of those things that a lot of people still don't know what they want to do in life. And that was the kind of thing when I joined the forces. It was one of those things that, what am I going to do? And this was an opportunity to do something different. And it was at the same time as I had a young family. So I was in there for just over 6 years, and then decided to come out for my family. And then that led on to a whole different world of, trying to find jobs in whatever I could to sustain an income then.
Yeah. Well, it's like when people tell a story, I don't know if you've got like mates who are a bit rough or something, but they can tell a story really well, when they're speaking. Maybe they couldn't write it properly, but they're very energized when they talk, and they use the word, they can speak. They're more interesting when they speak than like lots of academics, you know what I mean? Like sometimes you get an academic who's really boring, and sometimes you get somebody who's like a scally, like a bit of a criminal or something, but they're very funny when they speak, and they can tell a story. And out writing, like, is similar in a way. Maybe I'm not saying you're a criminal. So some writing is born out of experience, and you know what I mean. Some setbacks, like you said, people laughed at your story in school, and then maybe that had an impact on you to
No, I agree. I agree completely. I think you get the people that are really go through university and learn how to write properly and know how things are structured, and that gives a great base to write really efficient work with. But then they've got people perhaps like myself and other people that have had a lot of life experience, that they can reflect real feelings into that. So I guess when you were saying about how you felt kind of hungry when she wanted to eat those foods because you hadn't experienced that, them in the story, you kind of related to that a bit. Whereas it may not have been so simple for someone with a structured story to put those sort of details in there.
Exactly.
So life experience is a huge asset.
So being a fatty at some points in your life is good. Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know what starvation is. Yeah. This cover. So this covers these two covers. Yeah, they're very professional looking. Yeah. Where did you get these done?
Well, I was very fortunate at where I work at the moment that one of my friends was a graphic designer, and we had a little chat about what I wanted, and we found some pictures and we worked on the first cover. But then the second one, it was kind of funny that he was unable to help at the time when the book was coming out, and I'd kind of left it late, classically. So I had taken the files on the Photoshop and I was like, okay, I've got to do this. So the second one I managed to do myself. And do you know what? I guess.
Say it's better.
Say again?
The people say it's better.
Do you know what? It's a weird one, because perhaps if it was done more professionally, it wouldn't be so cluttered looking.
Yeah.
But it gives a nice effect to the embers, which is obviously the story is the embers of life. So it's kind of one of those things that it fits its genre of a horror story. But I think personally, I'd like a better cover if I could do it again. If that makes sense.
Yeah. I like the doll in the face. I thought it was like a weird scar. Because when I first I saw it, I thought it was like a book about witchcraft or something, you know.
Yeah.
I was looked at it and I was like, it looked a bit weird.
Well, what I really like is it doesn't come through very well on the cover, but on the on the full image on, say, software, on editing software, you can really see on the left side of her face is quite youthful, and on the other side of it, it's got like the grain and the tree bark in the face that makes it look a lot darker and weathered.
Yeah.
And when you get to the second story, that Daisy's character goes from a very youthful, innocent, kind of naive girl through a world of crap, let's be honest, and she finds out truths about who the people she's close to, and she goes through the dramas of the violence and the zombies and all those things, and then just trying to escape. It kind of makes her grow up very quickly. And then in the second,
how old is she meant to be? She's like just
if you find out about halfway through, she's about 19 at the time.
19,
yeah. So
I thought that about 17, but yeah, 19.
Yeah.
So you've got the second one. You've got another one, part 3.
It's not part 3. It's a weird one, because in theory the second one isn't really completely closed off. It leaves you satisfied with the story to that point. So there is definitely a way that could come back if needed, but you'd be happy enough to leave it where it was, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And the third book is completely standalone, but this is something I'm really passionate about at the moment, and I think it's got a lot of potential, and I can't wait to get it out. So
you just doing this now, writing full time, or are you?
Oh no, not at all. I wish. No.
People ask me what I'm doing, and I just kind of like move them along,
Yeah.
Because it looks better. I'll cut it out. It looks better if you just say yeah.
Of course, yeah. No, honestly, I think this third book, it sounds bizarre, but because you know what it's like with show life or producing shows, it takes up so much time, right? So with work, doing the show, there's not much time for writing as much as most people have. So I go through these weird phases of absolute commitment to I haven't touched the book for weeks. And I'm sure people, in the real world of just normal working routine, do the same anyway. So when the third book, this new one, arose, the first draft I did in 10 days, and it was something I had some time off for, and then just absolutely attacked it. And I had this a skeleton, a shell of a story, but it was 10 days, and then it's taken me then months following to do the first and second draft after that. So it's a real tough thing to juggle.
Yeah. So yeah, these shows that we do, like Oprah does like a show. She just sits there with an earpiece on.
I know.
Asks a few questions and gets paid millions. Yeah.
It's amazing, isn't it?
The process behind these shows, maybe people don't understand. You want to explain to them what you have to do.
You're absolutely right. And when you watch these shows on telly, they're great, but you see, like, when it comes to sort of production, not just the podcast itself, but obviously we're dealing with the visual world as well. That you have the prep for every show, whether you're learning about the author's work or their life story. Then you get the show ready, then you do the show, then everything post-production, from getting the links ready, the editing, the taglines, the hashtags and all that stuff. And then the continuation of then advertising everything afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's a real commitment.
and you read the books, yeah, and then it's like, so you read them, and then basically you don't even use that knowledge that much, yeah. Like I read the books to kind of connect with the writer a little bit, to give them, so I can buy the book, so then I can leave them a review.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I buy that so I can connect with the writer and understand a little bit more about them. But really, my knowledge of the book, I can't really share it too much because it just gives the story away, you know. So it's a weird one. It's like lots more work than people think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly tricky. We had a guest on recently with the ending was everything about the book, and it was to then Sarah Pinborough, Behind Your Eyes. It was a massive Netflix TV series as well.
I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, the ending was incredible, right? So she came on the show, and it's like, well, let's talk about that scene, and then was like, maybe not, or massive spoilers. You don't like turn this off now. And it's
what was the thing about that? Was she involved in the screenplay for that, or was she just?
I think she happily swiped her hands of it and left it to the professionals in that area, because I think she had screenwriting experience, just didn't want to take it on.
Yeah, because I'd like to read the book, because there's a bit where, like, in that show, you know, you can't say anyway, but there's a bit in that show where, like, after for like 2 or 3 episodes, I saw like what's happening here, you know what I mean? But then luckily the end pulls everything together.
Yeah,
and makes it a good story. But often, like, there's other shows I've watched where it's been brilliant for like a few episodes, and then the end comes and you think, oh, that was rubbish.
Yeah,
the best bit about that show is the end. Yeah,
it is. I didn't read the book before I saw the series, but my wife did, and she picked up a few differences. And everyone says, you know, a film or a series is different to the book, and it was a lot more graphic. And in the book, and you know, there's things that you can naturally cut out of a series, you know, emotions that you can't tell. But like, there's a scene with a cat, and you remember the house that, you know, the lady went into and trashed a place and had a knife, and the cat was there. But apparently in the book, you know, she brutally kills that cat. So there was a lot of graphic scenes in there that didn't make it to the telly. So, you know, it's one of those things that how far can you go with a TV show?
The British should be more angry about that than if they kill a person. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Have you had any sort of like negative reviews of your book?
I have. And purely, I had my first 1 star, I think, you know, christened 1 star about 3 weeks ago. And I used to get like kind of gutted when I had 4 stars, or I've had 1 or 2 3s, and I was like, oh, but like a 1 star came, and I was like, do you know what? I'm okay with this. And every review I've had that isn't a 5-star review is because the little pickups on grammar. And I understand it, and when people really put effort and time into they getting their grammar right in the, you know, the second book was much improved, but the first one, I look back at it and I can see straight away certain things I change, and it's just experience. So when I had sort of the 1-star review, it was about how they didn't even carry on. They just read a few things and were like, this just clearly grammatically isn't good enough. So they gave it a 1-star review, and I think it's fair. I mean, if you're someone who's really the grammar police and isn't looking at the story for what the story is, and you're not jumping into the world, which I knew that's what it was designed for. I knew it wasn't going to please people who were very good at the English literature. So, you know, if you're into the story, I think you'll enjoy it. If you're gonna,
I read through it as I was watching, because I got the book and the audio. Yeah, so that didn't cause big problems. Or
yeah, well, I say it's for the most part, most people would just get on and read that and just enjoy the story. But you know, there's people there that do highlight these things. So, you know. Well, the Writing Community Chat Show was formed because of the writing community, and just to help that everyone, the people you're speaking about, you know, Anna Moseycat, Mario, for example, they're huge people in that community, and it's such a nice thing to go on there and just see everyone having a bit of banter and just having a good laugh through the week. But then if anyone has a question, about a certain writing topic, they post it along, and there's tons of advice that follows. Yeah. So it's a real hub for great advice, but then that really friendly community as well. So it's very much there.
Who are your co-hosts for your?
I just got one, and that's Chris Hooley. He is a fellow indie author, and he's from Manchester, and I'm from South Wales. So it's really kind of a fun relationship we've got for the show.
Yeah, I'm not speaking to a Scouser.
Yeah.
To get me in there. Yeah. So have you got anyone good coming up on your show in the next few weeks?
On tomorrow, in fact.
Sorry, they're all good. But I mean,
yeah. Anyone worth listening to?
Rubbish ones, but like.
We have the woman who wrote the You series on Monday, which is tomorrow. So, but this will be in the past then, right? And who else? There's plenty. We are so booked up. It's insane.
Is that the You series on Netflix? The one.
It is, yeah.
I thought the weirdo.
Yeah, he's the weirdo. Caroline Kepnes. I just completely forgot her name then. Sorry. And I can't even think who we've got coming up. There's so many people. Oh, Tony Lee on Friday. He's a big comic book writer, but then very strangely recently come out as a pen named author that no one knew about, like a crime series. So he's going to talk about that as well, which is really interesting. And it's just, I don't know what your kind of guest selection is and the process you use, but what we try to do is find people that have got a good story. I mean, we had Melanie Blake on Friday, which was a whirlwind of a show, but her books are becoming massive productions and TV series and literally theatrical plays. So it's really interesting to have those sort of characters on. But it's also very nerve-wracking for us that have these characters on that are big, kind of known in show business and things like that. But then you get authors on from the community like this. And go on, what's your favorite? Who have you had a favorite guest on, or a favorite show? That's a bit hard to single a guest out.
And I have to say all of them, you know.
Yeah.
No, but the weird thing is, like, okay, I'd only speak to someone. Well, there is a snobbery to it, obviously, but it's like I wouldn't speak to somebody who I thought the book wasn't good.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't. I couldn't sit there and say, "Oh, I read your book; it's great." But really, I'm thinking, "No, it's shit," you know.
Yeah, this book is terrible. Let's talk about it. Unless
it might not be my sort of thing. I still understand if it's good. You know what I mean? If it's got a quality to it, if it's got character to it. You know?
The only way you could ever approach an interview like that would be to say, "Look, you know, your book's rubbish. Let's talk about it." But then you can't do that to a person. So I don't know.
Well, maybe you could. Maybe it depends on the person. Yeah. I mean, someone like you probably wouldn't care. You'd just be like, okay, why? Yeah. Maybe you just go along with it, with the banter or whatever, and say, okay. And then in a way that can have like a difference. So if I'm sitting there and I say your book's rubbish, then I'm going to put that at the start of the video.
Your book is shit, Chris. Well done.
If I sit there and say your book's rubbish, then that just makes me look like an arse, doesn't it? And people will like you more, you know.
There's got to be a bit of context in there, isn't there? But I mean, you know, well, I did watch your interview with Matt when you spoke about that, and you had mentioned that was the first kind of, what is it? What's the genre? Neo-crime, cyberpunk. Yeah, that you hadn't read that before, so it dragged you in once you got into it, but that wasn't your natural book to look at. And of course, we're going to deal with things like that because we are seeing so many people from different genres. What I find really interesting with a lot of guests is the ones that have used history. Yeah. And I think this is something that's been pretty decent. I think Stu Taunton came on. He spoke about a ship incident back in the day, that a really good description of that history, that he had then learned about and then developed into this story that sounded fantastic. And I think I'd love to do that one day, perhaps looking at, you know. Yeah,
like he started rewriting history. Any other things you're doing that you want to plug?
You know, similar to your sort of audience, I guess. We get the Writing Community Chat show, and it's very similar crossover. It's definitely a great community, so come check us out as well. And you know, the books, keep a lookout for my book, I guess, that's coming out that I really like the sound of and the feel of it and the story, the way it's going. I think I've got high hopes for this. It's called The Words of 11. It's about if I just give it very vaguely, it's about a writer's retreat gone very wrong in honor to horror. So there'll be more details to follow about that, but I can't wait for that to come out.
Brilliant. Brilliant talking to you, man. Yeah. We'll definitely do something in the future.
Certainly. I mean, we'll let you know when we go in places, and if you can give us some advice, that'd be fantastic.
Definitely keep in touch. Okay. Take care.
Thank you, Tim.
Cheers. Bye-bye.